In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Okay, today's topic is one of my favorites, and so it's good that it's today's topic. This morning we're going to be talking about mercy. Now, there's one thing specifically about mercy that I have found interesting specifically within this study. I know that we've made mention a couple different times of how many times different words are being used in the Bible. And coincidentally, when you look at the word mercy appears 365 times in the Old and New Testament. Anybody find a coincidence in that maybe? 365 times the word mercy is used. Okay, so the first thing that I pull from just that little number itself is a reminder that God's mercy is continual. That it is with us every day of the year. Except for, I guess, maybe leap year. But even then, God's mercy is with us. But a constant reminder that He is always showing His mercy towards us. It's offered to everyone at all times. Now, when we look at the word mercy, we see a few different things about this word mercy. And we're going to dive into the text in just a moment. And I'll warn you, there's a lot of verses for today. And we have typically touched on one or two. Well, we've got like 8, so there's no way we're going to finish this lesson today. But when we look at this idea of mercy, one thing that at least I've seen in the past is that we sometimes get into this habit of separating the God of the New Testament and the God of the Old Testament. And you say, well, no, we agree that the God of the Old Testament is still the God of the New Testament. Okay, well, what are some of the descriptors that we give to each? Well, when we talk about the New Testament, we talk about this loving God, this merciful God, this forgiving and graceful God. But then sometimes when we look at the Old Testament, we talk about the vengeful and wrathful and this justice God. This one who destroys His enemies and who wipes those who oppose Him from the face of the earth. Never forget that the God of the Old Testament and the God of the New Testament are one and the same. And this use of the word mercy as a descriptor of this God is used both in the New Testament and also in the Old Testament. Now, yes, we do see this word mercy being used as a descriptor of God in the New Testament more. But the description of mercy when describing God is present within the Old Testament. I believe it was 145 times or something like that. I believe it was 145, if I'm not mistaken. Let me double check that real quick. 125 times, excuse me, and then 240 times in the New Testament. So when we look at this word mercy, we see this ever-present descriptor of God as being this one who shows mercy to all, shows mercy to those who follow after Him. So never fail to think or never get within your own mind the idea that this Old Testament God and this New Testament God are two different beings, or that they have different actions. What we see is two different focuses of writing. What is the purpose of the Old Testament? For our learning and instruction, right? Okay, so how does that happen? What do we get within the first section of the Old Testament? What's that? The law. Okay, and what? What else? The law, the prophets, the wisdom literature or poetry, and then what? What was the last one? History, there we go. What about for the New Testament? Okay, what do we get in the New Testament? What's that? The same. Okay, they're just simply telling the same story in different ways with different writers about somewhat different subjects from here and there. What is the Old Testament pointing towards? Jesus and the cross. What is the New Testament pointing towards? Eternity, but also what? Jesus and the cross. The Old Testament points forward towards it. The New Testament points at it in its present and now in the past. And each of these writings is pointing towards Jesus and the cross. Now we get a couple of different ways of going about this. Like we mentioned, we had the law. Okay, this is the law for the people who followed after the law of Moses or the old law. the one that was passed away when Jesus was hung on the cross. And then when you're looking at the Old Testament and you begin to see some of the wisdom literature, or you see a little bit more of the writing, and you see these things that point towards a prophecy in history, you see these things that are pointing towards Jesus through prophecy, pointing at various places in history where people followed after God, but all of it is pointing towards the cross. Then when you get to the New Testament, you begin with the first four chapters first four books of the New Testament, looking at the life of Jesus and then examining His death on the cross. And then you get to the next chapter where you see after the death of Jesus, the next book. I'm not going to quit saying chapter all morning, I know it. You get to the next book, you get the Acts of the Apostles, what has happened after Jesus has left this world. Then you get into the epistle writings, or the letters, so to speak, of the apostles and of the followers of Jesus, writing to the different churches spread out. And what do those things tell about? They tell about how Jesus came to this earth, died on the cross, and what that means to us. How we put those things into practice. What we should do on our day-to-day lives. How we should stomp out temptation, this, that, and the other. All kinds of different messages that once again still point back to the cross. And then we get to the book of Revelation, when we see this idea of prophecy being introduced once more in the New Testament. And what's it pointing towards? Well, it's pointing towards a lot of things, but most of what it's pointing to, or mainly what it's pointing towards, is the return of Jesus. As Jesus comes back after He has lived on this earth, died on the cross, was resurrected, He's going to come back and bring His individuals, or bring His people back to Him and to be with Him in eternity. So when we look at this word mercy being used throughout the Bible, do not forget that the entire time that we're seeing the word mercy, we're still seeing the same character of God. Not a character of God in a descriptor of, like in a movie, a character, but the character is in somebody's character. This is the character of God as a character of mercy. Now, there is a side of God, a character of God that includes justice, and therefore can include wrath, like we talked about a few weeks back. But when we look at these things, you get to the New Testament, you might start to think, okay, well, this is more of a merciful God than what we see in the Old Testament. No, it's the same God. It's the same ideas, but what we're focusing on is Jesus, His Son, and His greatest show of mercy. The thing that put His mercy into practice. So when we look at the Old and New Testament, never fail to think that this God of the Old Testament and this God of the New Testament are different individuals. Just simply look at the fact that these two individuals, or these two beings at least, are the same, one and the same. Let's look at Hosea for just a second together. Hosea chapter 6 and verse 6 is where we will start. He makes mention of several different passages, as we mentioned. Let's go back to verse 1 of Hosea 6, and then we'll get to verse 6 and consequently in just a moment. So he says in verse 1 of Hosea 6, "Come, let us return to the Lord, for He has torn us, that He may heal us. He has struck us down, and He will bind us up. After 2 days He will receive us, and on the third day He will raise us up, that we may live before Him. Let us press on to know the Lord. His going out is sure as the dawn. He will come to us as the showers, as the spring rains that water the earth. What shall I do with you, O Ephraim? What shall I do with you, O Judah? Your love is like a morning cloud, like the dew that goes early away. Therefore I have hewn them by the prophets, and I have slain them by the words of my mouth. And my judgment goes forth as the light. For I desire steadfast love and not sacrifice, the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings. But like Adam," this is verse 7, "like Adam they transgressed the covenant. There they dealt faithlessly with me. Gilead is a city of evildoers, tracked with blood. As robbers lie in wait for a man, so the priest bands together. They murder on the way to Shechem. They commit villainy. In the house of Israel I have seen a horrible thing. Ephraim's whoredom is there. Israel is defiled." Remember, we talked about this, I guess it was the first week of last month as we started our study of the Minor Prophets. What was the book of Hosea primarily about? What is its main purpose? Guess what we're studying this afternoon? We're going to study Hosea again, I guess. No. What is the main principle, that is the main concept that we see within Scripture? Hosea is given a command by God to take what into his life? A harlot as what? as his wife. Okay? And he is told what this individual is going to do. He's going to leave him and go practice the practice of harlotry with other individuals besides him. and he has a requirement that is placed on him. You go, accept this woman as your wife, knowing what she will do. And when she does this thing, you go and you bring her back. And you show her love and mercy and forgiveness, and you cherish her. And then what's the concept put into practice from God's point of view? This is what I have done for Israel. This is exactly what I have done for Israel. I accepted Israel as my own people, knowing good and well what they would do, but yet it is still my responsibility to go and get them and bring them back and show them love, mercy, and forgiveness. Okay, I think it was me and Miss Glenda that were talking about it in the office one day. One of the things that I hope I made mention of, I genuinely cannot remember. It's been a month ago, so I can't remember too awful well. If I made the point that what we see in Hosea's life was going to be present. Okay, God did not make his wife Gomer to do these evil or wicked things. This was going to happen. Yet simply God used this moment in Hosea's life as an example for what he is facing with Israel. Yes, sir.
The book of Hosea is really not this for the nation of Israel. Only what they've done, and what's about to happen. Mm-hmm. The 3 children, not knowing what to name those children. No pity, no scatter, no mercy. But instead, that's what's going to happen to Israel because of what they've done. They're going to be scattered. They're going to be no pity on them. They're going to be no longer considered his people. That's exactly what happened in the story.
So how does that correlate to chapter 6 and verse 6? How does this message of Hosea go with verse 6? Notice what he says. I desire what? Steadfast love. Some versions say what? Mercy. And not sacrifice, the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings. Notice that first passage. What is the desire of God? That first part of the passage, I guess. Steadfast love, or some translations put it, mercy. His desire is mercy. It is mercy. But notice what his desire is not. My desire is mercy and not what? Sacrifice. The knowledge of God rather than what? Burnt offerings. Rather than burnt offerings.
Same thing God told, Samuel told Saul came back to destroy Philistine. Brought all the sheep and oxen back and some of the people. He said, what's this idea to do with the sheep and the oxen? He said, well, I brought back sacrifice. He said, well, obey God is better than sacrifice and the heart and the fat around. So that lesson should have been in verse 1 a long time before it happened.
And you even...
It's not that complicated either.
No.
We make it complicated. It's not. Because if you do the first to perfection, there's no need for the second.
Correct.
And that's what he's talking about.
Yeah.
He wants that steadfast love. He wants you to be...
That was going to be my next point. No.
Once we do those things to perfection, there is no need for the second.
Kind of touching on what Mr. Dale said, if you had no grasp of that first one, the second one wouldn't even make sense to you. Because you look at the nation of Israel, what has been required for them since their founding pretty much? Sacrifice. It's been present nearly every day of their lives. Thousands of animals they've seen in their lifetime go and be sacrificed. And so for God to say, not sacrifice, and something rather than burnt offerings might be a little bit weird for you. But as Mr. Dale said, if you get the one down, there's no need for the second. There's no need for the burnt offering or for the sacrifice if you have not done something to transgress God's law. So what in this instance is Hosea telling the nation of Israel, or is God telling the nation of Israel through Hosea? That his desire is for mercy and for steadfast love, rather than to have the need for sacrifice. His desire is also that they follow after the knowledge of God, rather than for the need for burnt offerings. When we think about our service to God, while we don't offer burnt offerings, there was an offering or a sacrifice placed for us. Okay, it's God's desire that we wouldn't have to need the sacrifice of Jesus. But because we don't do the other things right, we have to have that sacrifice of Jesus. But still, once again, do God's desires change? No. No. We might have different tasks for different people, maybe because maybe you're good at mercy, but you're not good at love. So He wants you to work on your love. But His desire is still the same. For us to have love, mercy, care, forgiveness, concern for others, and reach out and show Jesus to everyone that we can. His concerns are still the same. So when we see in Hosea 6:6 this idea of He desires mercy or steadfast love, what does that mean to us today as Christians? His desire is still for what? Mercy and love. Steadfast love. Notice we mentioned this, I believe it was last week. If I'm not mistaken, it was last week. We made mention of some of the promises of God. And one of the things that we made mention of is that God shows steadfast love. And so He's not asking us to return something to Him that He has not already given to us. He's saying, you give me steadfast love. Why? Because I have given you steadfast love or mercy. When we look at this translation difference here, this idea of steadfast love or mercy, we might look at them as different, but at the same time you can see them as one and the same. Mercy is a continual show of love. It is that continual love put into practice. Any thoughts on that before we move on to Matthew 9?
People of God becoming more and more like the world. They get worse and worse and worse. So we need to glean a lesson. Be more like God, less like the world. If we more like God, we will have mercy on those who don't deserve it, those who keep ourselves. So I think that's a lesson.
Yeah. All right, let's look at Matthew 9 together really quickly. Matthew 9, we'll begin with verse 9. As Jesus passed on from there, He saw a man called Matthew sitting at the tax booth. And He said to him, "Follow me." And he rose and followed Him. And as Jesus reclined at the table in the house, behold, many tax collectors and sinners came and were reclining with Jesus and His disciples. And when the Pharisees saw this, they said to His disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" But when He heard it, He said, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice, for I came not to call the righteous, but to sinners." Okay, this is a really good passage here. There's a couple of things that you can glean from this, and I want us to start together with, let's see, with verse 9. Where did Jesus find Matthew? He's a tax collector, but where did He find him? At the tax booth. He's at work. Okay, he walks up to this man collecting taxes at work, and what does he say to him? "Follow me." Okay, first off, what does that tell us a little bit about Matthew? Well, I don't know. Jesus saw the potential in him, and at the same time, I see even a great deal of faith here in Matthew. Man walks up to you in the middle of your job and says, "Follow me." And what does Matthew do here at the end of verse 9? And he arose and did what? Followed Him.
I think he heard of him before, though.
Yeah, I have no doubt about that. Yeah. I think that maybe he was just waiting for this invitation. He probably has seen such wondrous works by Jesus so far, but when you see him walk up to him, all it takes is 2 words. "Follow me." And he stops what he's doing. Now remember, who does Matthew work for? Rome. Okay, you just walked out on Rome. All right, Matthew, probably should have thought that one through a little bit better. He probably did. Hopefully he did. It's obviously going to pay off for him better in the long run. But you just left in the middle of your post working for Rome. I don't know if you know this about tax collectors, but they had not necessarily the best job, but they had a pretty well-paying job. Not always, purposefully better paying, but sometimes because of their cheating ways, they got paid very well. But he would have had quite the luxurious life. He would have had some things that others probably would have strived to receive. But yet, he's a tax collector for Rome. And Jesus walks up to him and says 2 words that we can see. And he left his job. Yeah, that's very true. Didn't matter how much money he made if he wasn't happy. He obviously saw the great need and the great desire to follow after Jesus.
And were they one level under sinners?
One level under sinners. And sinners. There's a separation place there. I've met one Christian who was a tax collector in my life, and he didn't stay in his position long. Yeah. He didn't stay in that job long, but he did his best. Anyways, we see in verse 10, like you said, there's a distinction place here, but we see in verse 10 that Matthew seems to not be the only one who is now following after Jesus. Maybe not to the extent in which Matthew did, but it seems at this point that as Jesus sits down or lays down, as we see in Scripture, lays down at the table, that who was there with him at the table? The disciples and who? Other tax collectors, seems besides Matthew at least, and sinners. Okay? Here comes the good guys here in verse 11. The high and mighty Pharisees who always seem to make their presence known. And when the Pharisees saw this, they said to his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" Notice what is said in verse 12. But when he heard it, Jesus being the he, when Jesus heard it, Jesus said, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick." I love what he says in verse 13 here. You can almost see the anger in the Pharisees' minds when we see this. Go and learn what this means. Okay, remember who Jesus is talking to. These are the Pharisees. What do the Pharisees think about themselves? High and mighty, knowledgeable, well practiced within the Scriptures. And this man who is eating with tax collectors and sinners tells you the phrase, go and learn what this means. Yes, sir. Pharisee. When you look at his description after that in verse 13, notice what he says. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice, for I came not to call the righteous, but sinners.
You can almost see the air quotes around.
Yeah. That was my next thought there is, you've got Jesus speaking to these people who think that they are right with God, who could not be more wrong in their thought process. And he is telling them, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, for I come not to call the righteous but the sinners.
Well, when you look for those first.
Yeah.
It's a multi-step process.
Yeah.
First they got to get over themselves.
Yeah.
And find the need for it. So once again, we see it all the time in the Scripture. You go to those who you can say the most of the first. Mm-hmm. And we see that example in Scripture all the time. But they get it started in the wrong place. You started with people who had the desire for it. They might have been wrong in their thinking, they might have been wrong in their living, but they were looking for something different. And the Pharisees wasn't. So you don't go to the hard place first. Say the most first. That's just a basic concept.
Basic concept, yeah. Notice the first word that is used here in verse 13. I've always found it interesting. Somebody want to read it for us? It's very simple. So if you want to volunteer to read, now's your chance to read one word. Y'all got it? What's that? Go. Notice what that says. Go. What does that imply that Jesus is saying to them? Not here. Somewhere else. He's telling the Pharisees, get out of here. Withdraw yourself. Remove yourself. Go. Get away. Now there's a purpose behind this leaving. Go and learn what this means. Like you said, they got to get over themselves first. Before they can come and listen to Jesus' teachings, they got to get over themselves. Okay? Do you know how many lessons you could get from just this one little section here in Matthew chapter 9? Just place yourself in each of these individual shoes. Okay, start with Matthew. All right? What does Matthew teach us from his perspective? To have faith in God and leave behind everything else. Even if it means a well-paying job or a comfortable position, or maybe even if it means being at what's the word I'm looking for? Under the pressure of the Roman government or of the government itself. Matthew shows us a great deal of faith here. in verse 9 and following. But then, what about verse 10? Put ourselves in somebody else's perspective. What about the other tax collectors and sinners? Okay, where were they rather than going about living their lives? They're with Jesus, listening to His teachings at the table. Now, we made mention of this table here a few weeks back. It mentions about instead of building up barriers or things that separate us from those who are in need, build a bigger table. Be more welcoming to all. Notice how big this table was that Jesus was opening the door to. Tax collectors and sinners. We're going to talk about this a little bit more in our sermon today about the heart of Jesus. But one of the things that we're going to focus on a little bit is this love for people who typically would not receive love. Or this desire to bring people to Him who others would seem to push away. What was the view, as we can see at least a little bit from the Pharisees, what was the view, the common view of tax collectors? They weren't just bad, they were the worst. They were the people that you despised. Why? Well, typically, they were one of your own. They were somebody who grew up amongst you, but instead of being on your side, now they're on the side of the Roman government, increasing your tax every time you walk up to pay your taxes, putting more and more pressure on you. That they viewed them not only as evil or wicked sinners, they also viewed them as traitors, people who have betrayed their own people. And yet Jesus welcomes them in and has them to sit around the table and begin to eat with them. What about sinners? What was the penalty or what was the cost of eating with somebody who was consumed with sin? What did that make you under the old law? Unclean. So what Jesus is doing here is welcoming unclean people to eat with His table. Now, why would this make you unclean? Well, typically because as you pass around, just like you're at Thanksgiving dinner, can you pass me the mashed potatoes? Can you pass me the corn or the mac and cheese? You're passing around the different dishes. You're coming in contact with these individuals. You might even be sharing a cup or a chalice, or you might even be breaking bread and separating the bread. So you're coming in contact with these unclean individuals. So what Jesus was doing in this instance, we sometimes just brush over these moments when Jesus is eating with sinners and in this instance tax collectors as well. But what you have to realize here is that typically speaking, this would not happen because the Pharisees would see this as something that made them unclean and therefore not worthy of being in the presence of God, and therefore they could not worship God or make sacrifice to God, and therefore they would not have any dealings with these people. But notice who is sitting amongst these tax collectors and these sinners? God Himself is sitting in amongst them as the great physician. He is welcoming in the people that nobody else would have anything to do with. Why? Because He had mercy. And He's trying to instill within the mindsets of these Pharisees, first off, get away from me until you get over your own self. Go and learn what these things mean. I desire, let me make sure I get it right. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. Okay? Even just looking at that phrase, mercy and not sacrifice. Okay, we see Jesus practicing mercy there with the there with the tax collectors and the sinners. But yet at the same time, what would be required for a Jewish individual to become clean after partaking of this meal with the tax collectors and sinners, or at least in their minds? What would be required of them after doing this with the tax collectors and sinners? Sacrifice. Yeah. They would have to cleanse themselves before they could even go cleanse themselves of their sins with the sacrifice at the temple. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Another thing you've got to understand with Jesus, even though He did die under the law, He was a period of transition. He was transitioning the old law to the new law. He's trying to get people from prayers in the morning, because you don't just stop when you start the other.
Yeah.
What's John the Baptist? He can't get right away from God. You don't get up to the south. John the Baptist came ahead of him, right away for him. So Jesus, where in the world, comes to the new covenant. That transition, it's all been all makes sense.
What was the first message that Jesus taught on the Sermon on the Mount after the Beatitudes? You have heard, but I say unto you. First message after getting their attention with these Beatitudes, these beautiful attitudes of a follower of Jesus, is that of, this is what you hear in the old law, but this is this new commandment. You have heard that you should not be angry. I say don't even, you should not murder, but I say don't even be angry with your brother. You have heard not to commit fornication, but I tell you not even to look upon anyone with the intent of lust. He's given them this new law. And throughout his entire life, he continues to live out this message of this new law. Okay? Under the old law, these Pharisees had this mindset of, we do not associate with these individuals. There's not even a phrase to describe them other than the tax collectors and the sinners, because that's how they saw them. They saw them as the worst of the worst, that they should not have any contact with them. And yet the entire time that Jesus was on this earth, who did he surround himself with? Tax collectors, sinners, those who are separated from him. Yes, sir.
Jesus used it several times. He said, but I say.
But I say unto you.
What does the world say? What does Jesus say? Who's going to God?
Yep.
He got our heart. You got our heart.
That phrase, I desire mercy, not sacrifice, is it not referencing back in Hosea? Particular phrase, and the Pharisees prided themselves on knowing the law. And, they're sitting there, I've heard this before.
Yeah.
And I think that's the reason Jesus told them to go, because they could search the scriptures
And see for themselves.
Hosea, they could learn where this came from, and in their mind they would say, what right does he say, I desire mercy?
Yeah.
Is he putting himself on the same level with God? And for him to know that, he was the master teacher.
Yeah.
And he was basically putting them in their place, but not embarrassing them. So he wanted them to learn for themselves, therefore teaching us that we need to learn for ourselves.
Yeah.
What we believe, and not just trust someone else's word.
And we can see their viewpoint in verse 11, the Pharisees. Notice how they refer to Jesus, your teacher. Not the teacher, not God. We obviously see that they place no importance on Jesus at this point, and he's saying, like you're saying, like you mentioned, putting the emphasis back on himself, I desire these things. Go and learn for yourself. Go and look back.
Do we see a time in Jesus when he started his ministry as an adult, when he started the ministry? I know when he was 12, they went to the temple and they did the sacrifice of it. Once he became the teacher, do we ever have an example of him making sacrifice from come out? Because wouldn't it then be, at that point, he would be sacrificing to himself?
Well, he wouldn't have a need for it.
Right.
Yeah, because he's sinless. The sacrifice is in place.
That had to make them angry. They were on him all the time forward.
Yeah.
Because, at that point, then he is stating he is God. And so not only is no need for sacrifice.
Yeah, because Jesus, yeah.
But also, who would he be sacrificing to?
Yeah.
Himself. And that would have been a really, really complicated thing for them to see and to understand. And that's what he was trying to get through to them in the transition.
I personally can't think of a moment. I might be wrong. Yeah.
But that's not sacrifice. That was to the Roman government.
Yeah.
The coin. He was under the old law.
Yeah.
He was God.
And like you said, he'd go into the temple regularly,
It was
I don't know.
done the ritualistic cleansing.
Yeah. Yeah, all that.
Because you can't go. That's the price of admission.
Yeah. That's the ticket. Yeah.
That the sacrifice is the.
Yeah. I personally can't think of anything. If y'all can, a moment. The question was: is there a moment in Jesus' life where we see an example of him sacrificing? And we made mention that there was no need there's no need for it because there was no sin in his life. Therefore, there was no need for sacrifice. Now he went into the temple and he gave back to the Roman government as he should have done. But there's no example of Jesus offering a sacrifice that I can think of.
We only have an example of his birth, 7 days after his born, he sacrificed the customary for an offering. He was circumcised and as far as himself. So
No. Y'all go read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John this week. And y'all let me know next week, because as far as I can, as I can remember, one, there's no need for it, so therefore, two, I don't see it practiced anywhere.
See, even, when he was crucified, he was in Jerusalem for a reason. It was
Feast.
So he was there for that. He was there for the feast to observe that. So he probably observed it.
He practiced Sabbath and all that, and there's no need for it. And, yeah.
Talk about this. David, Nathan comes David to what he God. David really from Psalm 51. Being brokenhearted over what he God. All this kind of stuff. He says in 51 verse 17, the sacrifices of God are a broken heart, a broken contrite spirit. And this is something these people work through. They want sacrifices. And that's what he means by God deserves requires mercy. Sacrifice. They were offering sacrifices, but they were showing the mercy to the Israelites. They had lost the record. They kept the record. They lost the record. So they were God eyes across the whole teaching of the hill. And also, that's what David's talking about. Broken spirit, broken heart, the sacrifices of God is pleasing.
do we not do the same thing today, though? Do we not do the same thing today? I mean, yeah.
We need to learn these lessons so that we don't
Repeat them.
In Matthew chapter 6, let me read just some verses. 3 verses, Matthew chapter 6, verses 6 through 8. Wherein shall I come before the Lord? Now that the Bible says, I shall come with him with burnt offering, with calves of the year old. The Lord shall please with thousands of rams, with 10,000 of rivers of oil. Shall I give the firstborn of my transgression, for the blood of the sin of my soul? But here's the key, verse 8. He has shown thee, O man, what is good, and what doth the Lord require of thee, but to do justice, love mercy, to walk humbly with thy God. See, it's back in the Old Covenant. No law, I mean, in the Old Testament. This is what God wanted his people to do. It wasn't just about the sacrifices, it was about the heart being in the sacrifices. They lost that. And so that's what he's not just speaking for. God would desire mercy rather than sacrifice. They were doing sacrifice, but they shouldn't have mercy.
We've got a minute left. Let's no. I told y'all we wasn't going to get through it. I promised you that at the beginning, just about. Let's look at the last part of Matthew 9:13. For I came not to call the righteous, but sinners. Okay? Jesus is, ignore that. Jesus' mindset in his teaching and his practice in his ministry should be the same as we reflect Jesus today. What should our focus be as Christians today? Save the lost. You're not here to save the righteous, because God's already saved them. Save the lost. Okay, where should our focus constantly be on? The lost. Seeking those who are sick. How do we do that? We look back at what Jesus was practicing just a few verses before that in Matthew chapter 9. Opening up the door and welcoming them in. Feasting with the tax collectors and the sinners and those who oppose God. Welcoming in those who are not in favor with God, and in doing so, bringing them closer to Jesus and introducing them to our Savior. Okay, next week we'll talk about love, and I can promise you we ain't going to make it through that lesson next week.